Now it is thought the Swahili played a much more active role in creating this trading empire, and that the wealthy merchants who built these coral towns were African, not Arab. It's a complicated story to untangle. By the 18th century, long after many of these coastal cities had gone into decline, the east coast of Africa was actually ruled by Arab sultans from the island of Zanzibar. To support their territorial claims, they insisted Africans were mere bystanders in the development of Swahili civilization. For 10 years, Mark Horton has been helping the Swahili rewrite their history and lay claim to their rightful legacy. For Horton, this derelict building is a testament to the betrayal of the Swahili people. It's called the House of Wonders.
This vast building represents the final humiliation of the Swahili. It was a present by the British to the Arab Sultan of Zanzibar in the 1880s. The British wanted to carve up large tracts of East Africa, but unfortunately the Swahili were in the way. They were the people who'd lived there for thousands of years. And so they pretended that the Swahili had no history, it was simply Arab history. And by giving this building to the Arab Sultan of Zanzibar, it was possible to create a whole new myth about the history of East Africa. And that is why we no longer have an idea of who the Swahili were.
Horton believes the only way to find out who they were is by digging. His goal? To find evidence of an early African settlement on the island of Pemba off the Tanzanian coast. He leads his team of workers to a site where he thinks he has found the legendary city of Kanbalu. According to Arab records from the 10th century, Kanbalu was the first Muslim city on the Swahili coast, so it is of crucial importance. In the best African tradition, Horton issues orders from his perch while his wife Kate digs below. They are starting to uncover the floor of a mosque that has completely collapsed. Horton hopes it will reveal how Islam came to East Africa. An old Arab legend offers one explanation. Abdul Juma, Zanzibar's chief archaeologist, turns it into a campfire story for the weary workforce. It comes from the journal of an Arab explorer.
Back in 922 AD, he wrote that a ship of Arab sailors set sail from Oman to an African trading post called Kanbalu. But a storm drove them much further south along the coast. Now, the people of this coast were reputed to be cannibals, so the sailors feared for their lives. The frightened Arab merchants were brought ashore and dragged before the king. Luckily, he seemed more interested in trading than eating. He was dazzled by the Arabian jewels, so they exchanged presents. The sailors had good reason to praise Allah. When it was time to go, they invited the king onto the ship to say farewell. The Arab captain had a wicked thought. In the Oman slave market, this African king could fetch 30 dinars. He gave the order to sail, and when they reached Oman, the king was sold into slavery. Over the next year, the king learned Arabic and studied the Quran and eventually became a devout Muslim. Then one day he escaped from his master and walked back thousands of miles to his village. Several years later, the Arab captain who had betrayed the king set sail on another voyage to Kanbalu. Once again, their ship was blown south. Once again, they found themselves off the land of Zanj. The Arab merchants were stunned to see the king they had sold years before and begged for mercy. "Go, you traitors," he said. "If I have forgiven you, it is because through me you have introduced my people to Islam. So in future when Muslims come here, we will treat each other like brothers." This time the king did not see them off.
The moral of the tale is that the Swahili might have become Muslim to avoid being sold into slavery. Horton thinks the spread of Islam along the Swahili corridor was a kind of insurance policy against the Arab slave trade. Kanbaloo, the Arab captain's destination in the tale, was a thriving trading port along the east coast of Africa. If this is Kanbaloo Horton has found, then beneath the floor of this stone mosque there could well be earlier mosques built in a more traditional African style. On this beach, the temporary fishing village has a wooden mosque. Swahili only live here during the fishing season, as they have for 1,000 years. But they always build a mosque, one probably similar to the very first Swahili mosques.
So, Mark, this is a timber-built mosque with thatch, typical of early mosques on these villages.
Right. And when they abandon these, they graduate to one made of mud?
Yes, mud and timber mosques. And usually it becomes larger than this timber mosque.
And then, again, one then has a stone one?
Yes, they built a stone on the same spot.
One on top of another.
On top of another.
Heavy rainfall brings a halt to the digging. The downpour softens the soil just enough to quicken Mark Horton's pulse. Beneath the stone mosque, they begin to find remnants of two wooden mosques, one on top of the other, the earliest dating back to the 8th century.
This place is probably the site of Kanbaloo. We know from historical evidence that Kanbaloo is the first place on the East African coast with Muslims. Perhaps this is the first structure that I'm kneeling on, the very place that the Muslims came to East Africa.
A Muslim festival honors the birth of Mohammed, but on the Kenyan island of Lamu, the celebration pulses to a uniquely African rhythm. The clans race dhows around the archipelago and surge along the harbor front. Islam may have come from Arabia, but this is a Swahili celebration in a Swahili town. Yet even many Swahili continue to believe the foundations of their civilization are Arab.
Some of the confusion was self-perpetrated in the sense that many Muslims among the Swahili people preferred to identify themselves in Arab terms. So they added to their racist tendencies of outsiders who wanted to deny Africans any credit anyhow. So these Muslims had quasi-religious reasons for self-Arabization, and Western observers had racist reasons for crediting the Arabs with Swahili civilization. And the two forms of reasons converged to create the confusion.
There can be no denying the external forces that molded towns like Lamu. The intricate wooden carving on doorways is a typical Swahili feature. Perhaps several centuries ago, Indian craftsmen visited and taught Africans how to carve elaborate designs into wood. But then the Swahili absorbed and adapted these lessons to fit their own culture. Perhaps Persians introduced the ornate designs carved into the walls of houses. But today, Swahili craftsmen practice the art of molding wet plaster.